The clock on the dashboard read 11:47 p.m. when David finally pulled out of the warehouse parking lot. His shoulders ached from loading boxes all evening, and all he wanted was to get home, heat up some leftover pizza, and collapse into bed. The temperature had dropped to 15 degrees. His old truck's heater was doing its best to keep up. He'd been working the night shift at Morrison's warehouse for 3 years now. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid the bills. Well, most of them anyway. The medical debt from his mom's treatment still hung over him like a dark cloud, but he tried not to think about it too much. One day at a time, that's what his mom used to say. The radio crackled with a weather alert. The forecaster's voice sounded urgent, warning about deteriorating conditions on the highways. David glanced at the windshield. Snow was falling harder now, the flakes swirling in his headlights like tiny ghosts. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel and focused on the road ahead. Route 47 was usually quiet at this hour, especially in weather like this. Most people had the good sense to stay home. David would have done the same if he'd had a choice, but bills didn't pay themselves. The highway stretched out before him, empty and white, with snow already covering the lane markers. That's when he saw it. At first, it was just a blur of red and white lights in the distance. As he got closer, he could make out a car pulled off to the side, its hazard lights blinking desperately through the snow. And there, standing next to it, was a figure. David's first instinct was to keep driving. It was late, it was freezing, and he was exhausted. Plus, you heard stories about people setting up traps on lonely highways. But something made him slow down. Maybe it was the way the person was standing there, arms wrapped around themselves, clearly shivering. Or maybe it was his mom's voice in his head, reminding him that kindness costs nothing. He pulled over about 20 feet, ahead of the stranded vehicle, and put his truck in park. Through his rearview mirror, he could see it was a woman. She was wearing what looked like an expensive coat, but it was completely wrong for this kind of weather. More fashion than function. She took a tentative step toward his truck, and he could see her face in his taillights. She looked scared. David grabbed his flashlight from the glove compartment and stepped out into the biting wind. The cold hit him like a wall, and he immediately pulled his worn work jacket tighter. "You okay?" he called out, his breath forming white clouds in the air. The woman nodded, but he could see her teeth chattering. "My car. It slid off the road. Well, not completely off, but it's stuck. And my phone died about an hour ago." An hour. She'd been standing out here in the freezing cold for an hour. David felt a pang of guilt for almost driving past. He walked over to her car, shining his flashlight at the wheels. The luxury sedan was buried in a snowbank up to its axles. It must have cost more than he made in 2 years. The leather seats visible through the window probably cost more than his entire truck. "Yeah, you're not going anywhere in this," he said, stating the obvious. "Not without a tow truck anyway." "I tried calling for one before my phone died," she said, her voice shaking from the cold. "They said it could be 3 or 4 hours. There are accidents all over the county." David looked up and down the empty highway. The snow was coming down even harder now, and the wind was picking up. 3 or 4 hours out here, she'd freeze to death. "Look, I don't mean to be forward, but you can't stay out here. You need to get warm." He hesitated, then added, "My truck's got heat. You can sit in there while we figure this out." The woman looked at him carefully, and he could see the calculation in her eyes. She was weighing the risk of getting into a stranger's truck against the very real danger of hypothermia. Smart woman. "I promise I'm not a serial killer," David said, trying to lighten the mood. "Just a tired warehouse worker trying to get home. You can keep your hand on the door handle if it makes you feel better." Something in his tone must have convinced her because she nodded. "Okay, thank you." He walked her back to his truck, opened the passenger door, and cranked the heat up as high as it would go. Then he did something his mom had taught him. He took off his heavy work jacket and handed it to her. "No, I can't take your coat," she protested. "You need it more than I do. I've got the heated truck." "You've been standing in the cold for an hour." He draped it over her shoulders before she could argue further. She pulled the jacket tight around herself, and David could see the relief on her face as the warmth started to seep in. He climbed into the driver's seat and reached behind to grab his thermos. "Coffee?" he offered, It's not fancy, just gas station stuff. But it's hot. That sounds like heaven right now, she said. Accepting the cup with trembling hands, they sat there for a moment in silence, the only sounds being the heater blowing and the wind howling outside. David noticed she was probably in her 50s, with gray hair pulled back and what had probably been a neat bun, but was now coming loose. Her hands wrapped around the thermos had rings that caught the dashboard light. Expensive rings. I'm David, by the way, he said. Eleanor, she replied, taking a sip of the coffee. And thank you. Really? I was starting to think no one would come. How many people on the road tonight? Smart people stayed home. Then what does that make us? She managed a small smile. David laughed. Broke, in my case. Had to work the night shift. He pulled out his phone to check if there was any cell service. 1 bar. Better than nothing. He tried calling the non-emergency line for the county, but after 10 minutes on hold, it became clear they were swamped with calls. Eleanor finished the coffee and handed back the thermos. Some color had returned to her face, which was a good sign. I don't suppose you know anything about cars. I know enough, David said. I've been fixing my own for years. Can't afford a mechanic on my salary. He grabbed his flashlight again and went back out to examine her car more closely. The sedan was definitely stuck, wedged in the snowbank at an angle. Even if he could get it started, trying to drive it out would just dig it in deeper. And with the snow still falling, any tracks he might make would be filled in within minutes. He got back in the truck, brushing snow off his shoulders. I hate to say it, but you're going to need that tow truck. Problem is, with the storm getting worse, I don't think it's safe to wait here. The visibility's getting bad, and if someone comes around that curve too fast, ... Eleanor understood what he wasn't saying. They could get hit by another vehicle sliding off the road. What do you suggest? She asked. David hesitated. What he was about to suggest could sound completely inappropriate, but it was the only logical option. My place is about 20 minutes from here. You could wait there, where it's warm and safe. Once the storm passes and your phone's charged, you can call whoever you need to call. He saw her tense up slightly. I know how that sounds, he added quickly, but I promise I'm just trying to help. You can't stay here, and there's nowhere else to go. The next town is 40 miles away. Eleanor studied his face for a long moment. David held her gaze, trying to look as trustworthy as possible. Finally, she nodded. Okay, thank you. David, I don't have many other options right now. He put the truck in gear and carefully pulled back onto the highway. David couldn't shake the feeling that this was going to be a night he'd remember for a long time. He had no idea just how right he was. The drive to David's apartment felt longer than usual. The storm had picked up strength, and he had to keep his speed down to barely 30 miles per hour. His windshield wipers worked overtime, struggling to keep up with the snow. Eleanor sat quietly in the passenger seat, occasionally glancing at him and then looking back out at the white darkness beyond the window. So what kind of business meeting has you out on Route 47 at midnight in a snowstorm? David asked, trying to break the uncomfortable silence. Eleanor seemed to choose her words carefully. I had a consultation in Riverside. It ran longer than expected. I should have checked the weather before leaving, but I was distracted. Riverside. That's 2 hours from here on a good day. I know. Not my smartest decision. She pulled his jacket tighter around her shoulders. What about you? You said you work at a warehouse? Yeah, Morrison's. Been there 3 years. I load trucks mostly, some inventory management. It's not exciting, but it's honest work. David changed lanes carefully, avoiding a patch of ice. I used to have bigger plans, you know. Was going to community college for business management. What happened? David was quiet for a moment. He didn't usually talk about this with strangers, but something about the situation made it feel okay. My mom got sick, cancer. The medical bills piled up fast, and someone had to take care of her. College had to wait. I'm sorry, Eleanor said, and she sounded like she meant it. She passed away 2 years ago. I keep telling myself I'll go back to school, but the debt from her treatment. He trailed off, shaking his head. Anyway, working double shifts helps chip away at it. They fell into silence again, but it felt less awkward now. More like two people who'd shared something real. David's apartment building came into view about 10 minutes later. It wasn't much to look at, a 3-story brick building from the 70s with a parking lot that needed repaving. He pulled into his usual spot and killed the engine. Well, here we are. Home sweet home. He led Eleanor up the exterior stairs to the second floor, fishing his keys out of his pocket. His hands were stiff from the cold. When he opened the door, he suddenly saw his apartment through a stranger's eyes, especially a stranger who drove a car worth more than everything he owned. The place was clean, at least. He'd learned that from his mom. But it was small, maybe 500 square feet total. The kitchen was basically just a corner with a stove, fridge, and a few feet of counter space. His couch was a hand-me-down from a coworker, and the coffee table was something he'd found on the curb and refinished himself. The TV was old enough to be thick. "Sorry about the mess," he said, even though there wasn't really a mess. "I wasn't expecting company." "David, you're letting a stranger into your home in the middle of the night." "I'm not here to judge your decorating." Eleanor managed a tired smile. He turned up the thermostat, and the ancient heater clanked to life. "Bathroom's through there if you need it. Let me find you some dry clothes. Those pants are soaked from the snow." David went to his bedroom and dug through his dresser. Everything he owned would be too big for her, but it was better than wet clothes. He found an old pair of sweatpants with a drawstring and a faded college sweatshirt. Then he remembered the box in his closet, the one with his mom's things he couldn't bring himself to donate yet. He pulled out a soft cardigan his mom used to wear around the house. It still smelled faintly of her lavender soap. For a second, he just held it, feeling that familiar ache in his chest. Then he added it to the pile of clothes. When he came back out, Eleanor was standing by the window, looking out at the storm. He handed her the clothes. "These should fit better than my stuff. The sweater was my mom's. I think she'd want someone to get use out of it." Eleanor took the clothes, and something in her expression shifted. "Thank you. That's very kind." While she changed in the bathroom, David went to the kitchen and opened his fridge. He had exactly 3 eggs, half a loaf of bread, some butter, and a can of soup. Not exactly impressive. He grabbed the soup and dumped it in a pot. Turning on the stove, Eleanor emerged a few minutes later wearing the dry clothes. His mom's cardigan fit her perfectly, and the sweatpants, while baggy, were at least dry. She looked more human now, less like a frozen statue. "Soup's almost ready. It's just chicken noodle from a can, but it's warm." "That sounds perfect, actually." David poured the soup into 2 mismatched bowls, and they sat at his small kitchen table. It barely fit 2 people, and their knees almost touched underneath. Eleanor wrapped her hands around the bowl, letting the heat seep into her fingers. "So," David said between spoonfuls, "you said you work in business? What kind?" "Consulting, management, investments. A little bit of everything." Eleanor was being vague, and David picked up on it. Mysterious. "Are you a spy or something?" She laughed. A real laugh. "No, nothing that exciting. I just prefer to keep work and personal life separate when I can." "I'm not trying to pry." They ate in comfortable silence for a while. Outside, the wind howled, and snow continued to pile up. David got up to check his phone. Still no service beyond that one bar, and news alerts showed the entire county was basically shut down. "Looks like this storm's going to last a few more hours at least," he said. "You're welcome to take the bed. I'll crash on the couch." "Absolutely not. You've already given me your jacket, your clothes, your food. I'm not taking your bed too. It's not up for debate. You've had a rough night and you need actual rest. The couch is fine. I've fallen asleep on it watching TV more times than I can count." Eleanor looked like she wanted to argue but was too tired. "You're stubborn, aren't you? When it comes to doing the right thing?" "Yeah, my mom made sure of that." He grabbed a blanket and pillow from the closet and set them on the couch. Then he plugged Eleanor's phone into a charger by the kitchen counter. The screen lit up showing 1% battery. "Give it an hour and you should be able to make calls," he said. Eleanor stood there for a moment, just looking at him. "Why are you doing all this?" "You don't know me." David shrugged. "Does it matter? You needed help. I was there. That's how it's supposed to work, right? In theory, but most people wouldn't have stopped. Most people definitely wouldn't have brought me to their home. Then most people are missing out. My mom used to say that helping someone costs you nothing but means everything to them. I guess it stuck. Eleanor's eyes got a little misty, and she quickly looked away. Your mother sounds like she was a wonderful person. She was the best. David grabbed a glass of water and set it on the coffee table. Get some rest. We'll figure everything out in the morning. She nodded and headed toward the bedroom, then paused at the door. David, thank you, really. Don't mention it. After she closed the door, David settled onto the couch and pulled the blanket over himself. The cushions were lumpy, and he could feel a spring poking into his back, but he'd slept in worse conditions. Through the thin walls, he could hear the storm raging outside. He thought about the strange turn his night had taken. Here he was, letting a complete stranger sleep in his bed while he took the couch. His buddy Carl from the warehouse would call him crazy. Maybe he was. But something told him Eleanor wasn't just some random person. There was something about her, the way she carried herself, the way she asked questions like she was really listening to the answers. David's phone buzzed. With a low battery warning, he plugged it in and closed his eyes. Tomorrow would bring whatever it would bring. For now, he'd done what he could to help someone in need. That was enough. As he drifted off to sleep, he didn't know that the woman in his bedroom was lying awake, staring at the ceiling of his modest apartment, thinking about how different this night had been from anything she'd experienced in years, and how a warehouse worker with almost nothing had given her everything without. Asking for anything in return, it was a lesson she wouldn't forget. David woke up to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee. For a confused moment, he thought he was dreaming. He never made coffee in the morning because he was always rushing to get to bed after his night shift. Then the events of last night came flooding back. He sat up on the couch, his neck stiff from the awkward angle. The storm had passed. Through the window, he could see bright blue sky and at least a foot of fresh snow covering everything. The parking lot looked like a white blanket, and someone's car was completely buried except for the antenna. "Good morning," Eleanor said from the kitchen. She was standing by his coffee maker, already dressed in her own clothes, which she must have hung up to dry overnight. His mom's cardigan was folded neatly on the counter. "I hope you don't mind. I found the coffee filters." "No, that's great. Thanks." David stood up and stretched, feeling every one of his 31 years. "How'd you sleep?" "Better than I have in months, actually." "Your bed is comfortable." David laughed. "It's a mattress I got on sale 5 years ago, but I'll take the compliment." He accepted a cup of coffee from her. "Looks like the storm's over." "Yes, my phone's charged now. I was able to reach my assistant about 20 minutes ago. She's arranging for a tow truck and sending a car to pick me up."
"That's good."
"Glad you got through." They stood there sipping coffee, and David felt a strange sadness creeping in. It was weird. He'd only known this woman for about 8 hours, but the apartment was going to feel emptier after she left. They'd talked for hours last night before finally going to sleep about everything and nothing. She'd asked him about his dreams, and he'd found himself telling her things he hadn't told anyone. "Hey, I was thinking," Eleanor said, setting down her cup. "You mentioned last night that you wanted to open your own business someday. An auto repair shop, right?" David nodded, surprised she remembered. "Yeah, that's the dream. I've always been good with cars, fixing things. Taught myself mostly from YouTube videos and trial and error on my own truck." He laughed self-consciously. "Probably sounds stupid. Doesn't sound stupid at all. It sounds like you know exactly what you want. Knowing what you want and being able to afford it are two different things, though." David walked over to a shelf by the TV and pulled down a worn notebook. "I've got it all planned out. Where I'd want to locate it, what equipment I'd need, how I'd price services to be affordable for working people in the neighborhood. I even sketched out the logo." He handed her the notebook, feeling vulnerable. He'd never shown this to anyone before. Eleanor opened it carefully and studied the pages. Her expression was hard to read. "This is detailed," she said, flipping through the business plan he'd written out in his spare time. "You've really thought this through. The financial projections, the target market analysis, even a marketing strategy. A lot of good it does me. The startup costs alone would be around $80,000. And that's if I found a cheap location and bought used equipment. Banks won't loan money to a warehouse worker with medical debt and no collateral. He took the notebook back and put it away. But it's nice to dream, you know? Eleanor was quiet for a moment, and David worried he'd made things awkward by oversharing. But then she said, "Dreams are only impossible until someone makes them real." Before David could respond, her phone rang. She answered it, stepping toward the window. He couldn't hear much of the conversation, but he caught phrases like, "Yes, it's the address I texted you in 30 minutes, that's fine." She hung up and turned back to him. "My ride will be here soon. The tow truck is already at my car." That was fast. "They have good people working for me." She paused, seeming to consider something. "David, can I ask you something? Last night, when you stopped to help me, did you think about who I might be? If I might be someone who could help you in return?" The question caught him off guard. "No, honestly, I just saw someone who was freezing and needed help." "Why would I think about it?" "Most people would. Most people are always calculating what they can get from a situation." David shrugged. "Maybe I'm not most people. Or maybe I'm just too tired from working nights to be that smart." He smiled. "Besides, my mom raised me better than that. You help people because it's right, not because of what you might get out of it."
Ow.
Eleanor looked at him for a long moment, and he couldn't quite read her expression. It was like she was seeing him for the first time, really seeing him. "Can I have your phone number?" she asked suddenly. Sure. Why?" "I'd like to send you a thank you gift. For the help, the shelter, everything." David waved his hand dismissively. "You don't need to do that. Seriously. You've already paid me back." "How have I paid you back?" "I've been nothing but a burden since you picked me up." "The conversation," David said simply. "Last night talking with you, that was the most interesting evening I've had in months. Most nights I just come home, eat, and pass out. Having someone to talk to, someone who actually listened, that was worth more than any gift." Laner's eyes got a little watery again, just like they had last night. She blinked and looked away. "You're something else, David. Write down your number for me anyway, please." He found a scrap of paper and wrote down his cell number, then handed it to her. She tucked it carefully into her purse. They spent the next 20 minutes making small talk and tidying up the apartment, though there wasn't much to tidy. Eleanor insisted on washing the coffee cups and soup bowls from last night. David tried to protest, but she waved him off. "It's the least I can do." A text came through on her phone. "The car's here." David walked her down to the parking lot where a sleek black town car was waiting, its engine running. The driver got out and opened the back door. He was wearing a suit that probably cost more than David's monthly rent. Eleanor turned to David and extended her hand. He shook it, feeling the firm grip and the warmth of her palm. "Thank you, David, for everything. For stopping, for the shelter, for treating me like a person instead of..." She stopped herself. "Just thank you. You're welcome. Drive safe, okay? Or have your driver drive safe, I guess." She smiled and started to get in the car, then paused. "David, that dream of yours, the auto shop? Don't give up on it. You have something rare. You have integrity and skill and the kind of work ethic that's hard to find. Those things matter." "Thanks. That means a lot." "I mean it. You're going to do great things. I can tell." She got in the car, and the driver closed the door. Through the tinted window, David could just barely see her raise her hand in a small wave. He waved back as the car pulled out of the parking lot, its tires crunching in the fresh snow. And just like that, she was gone. David stood there for a minute, watching the car disappear down the street. He felt oddly emotional, which was stupid. She was just a stranger he'd helped. But it hadn't felt that way. It had felt like meeting someone important, someone who understood things without him having to explain. He shook his head and went back upstairs. His apartment felt quieter now, emptier. The coffee maker was still warm, and his mom's cardigan was still on the counter where Eleanor had folded it. He picked it up and held it for a moment before putting it back in the box in his closet. Life would go back to normal now. Work tonight, sleep during the day, pay bills, save what little he could. The same routine he'd been living for 3 years. That was okay, though. That was life. He never expected to hear from Eleanor again. Why would he? She'd go back to her world, whatever that was, and he'd stay in his. That's how these things worked. 3 weeks passed. David fell back into his routine. Work, sleep, repeat. He thought about Eleanor sometimes, usually when he was driving Route 47 and passed the spot where he'd found her. He wondered if she made it home okay, if she thought about that night at all. Then on a Tuesday morning, he got home from his shift. He found an envelope wedged in his door. Not a regular envelope, but the thick, expensive kind made of cream-colored paper. His name was written on the front in elegant handwriting. His hand shook slightly as he opened it. Inside was a business card and a handwritten note on matching stationery. The business card read, Eleanor Hartley, Chief Executive Officer, Hartley Industries. The note said, David, I wasn't completely honest with you about who I am. I'd like to correct that. Please meet me at the address below this Thursday at 10 a.m. I promise it will be worth your time. With gratitude, Eleanor. Below that was an address downtown. Hartley Tower. David stood in his doorway, staring at the card, his mind racing. Hartley Industries. He'd heard of them. Everyone had. They were one of the biggest corporations in the state, maybe in the country. And Eleanor was the CEO, the woman he'd given his jacket to, the woman who'd slept in his bed, the woman he'd served canned soup. Oh man, David said out loud to his empty apartment. Oh man. He looked at the card again, reading the address. Thursday at 10. That was 2 days away. He had absolutely no idea what was waiting for him, but he knew one thing for certain. His life was about to change. David stood in front of Hartley Tower, feeling completely out of place. The building was 60 stories of glass and steel, reflecting the morning sun like a mirror. People in expensive suits rushed past him, all of them looking important and busy. He looked down at his own clothes. The same dress shirt he'd worn to his mom's funeral 3 years ago, and a pair of khakis. He'd ironed twice to get the creases right. His stomach was doing flips. He'd barely slept since receiving Eleanor's note. Part of him had considered not coming at all. What could a billionaire CEO possibly want with him? Curiosity and something else? Maybe hope had won out? The lobby was even more intimidating than the outside. Marble floors, high ceilings, and a massive desk where 3 receptionists sat, looking like they'd never had a stressful day in their lives. David walked up to the closest one, trying to look like he belonged there. Double quotes. Hi, I have a meeting with Eleanor Hartley at 10. The receptionist looked at him over her computer screen, her expression neutral. Name, David Chen. She typed something, then her eyebrows went up slightly. Whatever she saw on her screen changed her attitude. Of course, Mr. Chen, Ms. Hartley is expecting you. Take the elevator on the right to the 60th floor. Her assistant will meet you there. Thanks, David managed, his mouth suddenly dry. The elevator was the fastest he'd ever been in. His ears popped as it shot upward. When the doors opened on the 60th floor, he stepped into a reception area that was bigger than his entire apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the whole city, and the furniture looked like it belonged in a museum. A woman in her 30s approached him with a professional smile. Mr. Chen? I'm Patricia, Ms. Hartley's executive assistant. Please follow me. She led him down a hallway lined with modern art that probably cost more than he'd make in his lifetime. David tried not to gawk, but it was hard. Everything here screamed money and power. Patricia stopped at a set of double doors and knocked once before opening them. Ms. Hartley, Mr. Chen is here. Thank you, Patricia. Please hold my calls. David stepped inside, and the doors closed quietly behind him. The office was enormous, with that same stunning city view. Eleanor was standing by the window, but she turned when he entered. She was wearing a navy blue suit that fit perfectly, her hair styled professionally. She looked every inch the powerful CEO. But when she smiled, it was the same warm smile from that night in the storm. David, thank you for coming. Please, sit down. She gestured to a seating area with comfortable leather chairs arranged around a coffee table. David sat, feeling the leather creak under him. Your assistant said you're the CEO of Hartley Industries. I am. Have been for 15 years. Eleanor sat across from him, crossing her legs. I'm sorry I wasn't completely honest with you that night. I have to be careful about revealing who I am to strangers. I get it. I think I do. David looked around the office. This is quite a step up from my apartment. Your apartment was perfect. It was real. Eleanor leaned forward slightly. David, do you know why I asked you here? Honestly, no clue. I've been trying to figure it out for 2 days. That night in the storm, you helped me without knowing who I was. You gave me your jacket, your food, your bed. You showed me your dreams, your business plans, without any expectation that I could help you achieve them. Well, yeah, I didn't know you could. Exactly. And that's what made it meaningful. Eleanor picked up a folder from the coffee table. In my position, everyone wants something. Every conversation is a negotiation. Every kindness comes with strings attached. People see my name, my company, my money, and that's all they see. But you saw a person who was cold and scared and needed help. David didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded. Eleanor opened the folder and pulled out several documents. I've spent the last 3 weeks thinking about our conversation, about your dreams, your work ethic, your integrity. I also had my team do some research. I hope you don't mind. Research on me. Nothing invasive, just the basics. Your employment, history, your financial situation, your reputation in the community. She slid one of the documents across the table. Your supervisor at Morrison's had nothing but good things to say. Said you're the most reliable worker they have. Always on time, never complains. Helps train new employees without being asked. David felt his face get warm. I just do my job. You do more than that. I also found out that you've been sending money to your former neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, to help with her heating bills, even though you can barely afford your own expenses. How did you... David stopped. She's 83 and lives on Social Security. Her furnace is ancient. It's not a big deal. It is to her. It is to me. Eleanor pulled out another document. I also reviewed your business plan, the one in your notebook. You let me photograph those pages, remember? What? David had forgotten about that. Eleanor had asked if she could take pictures of his sketches and plans, and he'd said yes without thinking much of it. I had my business development team analyze it. Want to know what they said? I'm almost afraid to ask. They said it's one of the most thoughtful small business plans they've seen. Your market analysis is spot-on. Your pricing strategy is smart. Your focus on serving working-class families is both ethical and economically sound. The only thing it's missing is capital. David's heart was pounding now. Eleanor, what are you saying? She pulled out one final document and placed it in front of him. I'm saying I want to invest in your dream. Hartley Industries has a small business initiative fund. We identify promising entrepreneurs who need a chance and provide them with startup capital, mentorship, and resources. I want you to be part of that program. David stared at the paper in front of him. It was full of legal language he didn't understand, but he could see numbers. Big numbers. This says $85,000. That's the initial investment, enough to lease a location, buy equipment, cover your first 6 months of operating costs, and pay yourself a modest salary. You'll also get access to our business. Advisors, legal team, and accounting services for the first 2 years. I don't understand. Why would you do this? Eleanor's expression softened. Because that night, you reminded me why I got into business in the first place. It wasn't for money or power. It was because I believed in creating opportunities and helping people build better lives. Over the years, I'd forgotten that. I'd gotten so caught up in board meetings and profit margins that I'd lost sight of the human element. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city. You helped me when I was at my most vulnerable. You expected nothing in return. That kind of integrity is rare, David. It's worth investing in. David stood too, his legs shaky. This is too much. I can't just take this kind of money. You're not taking it. You're accepting an investment in your business. There are terms, of course. You'll own 80% of the business. Hartley Industries will own 20%. You'll provide quarterly reports on your progress. And there's one other requirement. What's that? Once your business is stable and profitable, you agree to mentor at least one other person trying to start their own business. Help them the way I'm helping you. Pass it forward. David's eyes stung with tears he wasn't expecting. He blinked them back, trying to keep his composure. I don't know what to say. Say you'll do it. Say you'll take this chance and build something meaningful. He looked at the contract again. then back at Eleanor. What if I fail? What if the business doesn't work? Then you tried. It's more than most people can say. But I don't think you'll fail, David. I've built a career on reading people, on identifying potential. You have something special. Care about doing things right, about treating people fairly. That's the foundation of any successful business. David wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. My mom would have loved this. She always said I could do anything I set my mind to, but I never really believed her. She was right, and she'd be proud of you. The office was quiet for a moment. Outside, the city hummed with life, thousands of people going about their day. None of them knowing that something extraordinary was happening 60 floors up. Okay, David said finally. Okay, I'll do it. Eleanor smiled, really smiled, and extended her hand. Welcome to the team, David. I think this is the beginning of something special. He shook her hand, feeling the same firm grip from that morning in his parking lot. But this time, everything was different. This time, he wasn't saying goodbye. He was saying hello to a future he'd only dared to dream about. As he left Hartley Tower an hour later, his contract signed, and a business advisor's contact information in his phone, David stood on the sidewalk and looked up at the building. Somewhere up there, Eleanor was probably already in another meeting, making more decisions that affected thousands of people. But she'd taken the time to change one life, his life. David pulled out his phone and opened the Photos app. The picture of his mom he kept as his wallpaper, taken the Christmas before she got sick. She was smiling, wearing that same cardigan he'd given to Eleanor. We did it, Mom, he whispered. We're actually going to do it. Then he started walking, his steps lighter than they'd been in years, toward a future that suddenly seemed full of possibilities. 6 months later, David stood in front of a renovated warehouse on the east side of town, holding a pair of oversized scissors. A red ribbon stretched across the front entrance, and a small crowd had gathered. His buddies from Morrison's were there, along with Mrs. Patterson in her wheelchair, some neighbors from his apartment building, and a few reporters who'd gotten wind of the story. The sign above the door read Chun's Auto Service in bold letters, with the logo he'd sketched in his notebook brought to life by a professional designer. Under it, a smaller sign said, Honest work, fair prices. David's hands were sweating despite the cool autumn morning. He'd been working non-stop for 6 months to get to this moment. The location had taken 2 months to find. A former printing warehouse that needed serious renovation, but had good bones and plenty of space. The equipment had been carefully selected, a mix of essential tools and a few splurges on diagnostic machines that would let him handle modern vehicles. You ready? Asked Leonard, the business advisor Eleanor had assigned to him. The older man had become something of a mentor, teaching David everything from bookkeeping to customer service strategies. As ready as I'll ever be. Then let's do this. David stepped up to the ribbon. He'd prepared a speech, had written it out, and practiced it a dozen times. But now looking at all these faces, people who'd supported him and believed in him, the prepared words felt wrong. I'm not good at speeches, he started, his voice cracking slightly. 6 months ago, I was working night shifts at a warehouse, trying to keep my head above water. I had dreams, but they seemed impossible. Then one night, I helped someone who was stranded in a storm, and that act of kindness changed my life. He paused, seeing Eleanor standing at the back of the crowd. She'd insisted on keeping a low profile, wearing casual clothes and sunglasses. She gave him a small nod of encouragement. This shop isn't just about fixing cars. It's about giving people a fair shake. It's about treating customers the way I'd want to be treated. And it's about proving that one person believing in you can make all the difference. He raised the scissors. Thank you all for being here. Let's get to work. He cut the ribbon, and the small crowd applauded. People started filing inside to tour the shop. David had set up a coffee and donuts table, and he watched as his friends explored the 3 service bays. The waiting area with comfortable chairs and a TV, and the small office he'd set up with a glass window so customers could see him working. Mrs. Patterson wheeled up to him, her eyes wet with tears. Your mother would be so proud of you, David. So very proud. Thanks, Mrs. Patterson. That means everything. When can I bring my Buick in? The transmission's been making a funny noise. You're my first Official customer. How about next Monday? And there's no charge. Consider it payment for all those cookies you used to bake for me and Mom? Absolutely not. You'll charge me your normal rate, young man. You have a business to run. The morning passed in a blur of handshakes and congratulations. Around noon, after most of the crowd had left, Eleanor approached him. Leonard had drifted away tactfully, giving them privacy. Quite a turnout, she said, removing her sunglasses.
No.
I didn't expect this many people to care. People always care when they see someone doing good work. She looked around the shop with an appraising eye. You've done well, David. This is exactly what I hoped it would be. I couldn't have done it without you. You could have. It just would have taken longer.
Hey.
She smiled. I have something for you. Eleanor handed him an envelope. Inside was a photograph of her standing next to her car the night of the storm, buried in snow with the hazard lights on. He had no idea who'd taken it or when. My driver went back the next morning to arrange the tow. He took this picture. I had it framed because I want you to remember something. She pointed to the image. That night, I was just a person who needed help, and you were just a person who gave it. No calculations, no expectations, just human kindness. Don't ever lose that, no matter how successful this business becomes. David studied the photo, remembering how scared she'd looked, how the whole night had felt surreal. I won't. I promise. Because I'm going to hold you to the other part of our agreement, too. Have you thought about who you'll mentor? Actually, yeah. There's a kid who's been hanging around here the last few weeks. Tommy. He's 19. Dropped out of school. Been in some trouble. But he knows cars. I've watched him look at the engines when he walks by. He's got the bug. Are you going to offer him a job? An apprenticeship. Same deal you gave me. A chance to learn, to build something, to be part of something bigger than himself. Eleanor's eyes lit up. Perfect. That's exactly what I hoped you'd do. Over the next few months, Chen's auto service found its rhythm. David hired two experienced mechanics and Tommy came on as an apprentice. The kid was rough around the edges, but he was eager to learn and showed up every day on time. David saw himself in Tommy, that hunger to prove yourself, to be more than your circumstances. Word spread quickly about the shop. David kept his prices fair and never recommended unnecessary work. When single mothers came in with car trouble, he'd often find ways to discount the labor. When elderly customers on fixed incomes needed repairs, he'd source used parts to keep costs down. It wasn't always the most profitable approach, but it felt right. The shop started to become more than just a business. It became a community hub. David kept the coffee pot running all day, and people would stop by just to chat. He offered free basic maintenance classes on Saturday mornings, teaching people how to change their own oil and check their fluids. Tommy helped teach these classes, gaining confidence with each session. One evening, about 8 months after opening, David was closing up when he noticed a car pulled over on the street outside, its hood up. A young woman was standing next to it, looking frustrated and a little scared. It was getting dark, and this wasn't the best neighborhood. David grabbed his tools without thinking. Need some help? The woman looked relieved. It just died on me. I don't know anything about cars. Let me take a look. It was a loose battery cable, an easy fix. David tightened it, and the car started right up. The woman tried to pay him, but he waved her off. Don't worry about it. Just pass it forward someday when you see someone who needs help. As he watched her drive away, David felt something click into place. This was it. This was what Eleanor had been trying to teach him. Kindness wasn't a transaction. It was a cycle, chain reaction that could spread farther than you'd ever know. He went back inside and found Tommy cleaning up the last bay. The kid had come so far. He was saving money now, talking about getting his GED, making plans for the future. Hey boss, Tommy called out. I was thinking, that community college has a night program for business management. Maybe I could take a class or two. You know, learn how to run a shop like this someday. David felt his throat get tight. I think that's a great idea. In fact, I'll help pay for it if you keep your grades up. Seriously. Seriously. Someone helped me when I needed it. Now it's my turn to help you. Tommy looked like he might cry but caught himself. Thanks, boss. I won't let you down. I know you won't." That weekend, David drove out to visit his mother's grave. He did this once a month, bringing fresh flowers and sitting on the bench nearby. This time, he brought a photo of the shop. "We did it, Mom," he said quietly, placing the photo against the headstone. "The shop's running, we're helping people, and I'm teaching Tommy the same things you taught me. About integrity, about kindness, about doing the right thing, even when it's hard." The wind rustled through the trees, and David could almost hear his mother's voice. Proud and encouraging, like always. A year after opening, Eleanor visited the shop again. This time she brought someone with her, a young woman who looked nervous but determined. "David, this is Rachel. She has a dream of opening a bakery, but she needs guidance. I thought perhaps you could share your experience with her. Tell her what this journey has been like." David looked at Rachel and saw the same hope and fear he'd felt standing in Eleanor's office. He smiled and gestured to his small office. "I'd be happy to. Come on, let's talk about dreams and how to make them real." As they sat down, David caught Eleanor's eye through the glass. She nodded once, a gesture of approval and gratitude. The cycle continued. Kindness leading to opportunity, leading to more kindness, spreading outward like ripples in a pond. That night, driving home through the same streets where he'd found Eleanor in the storm, David thought about how one decision had changed everything. He could have driven past that night. Most people would have, but he'd stopped. And that simple act of humanity had set off a chain reaction that was still unfolding. His phone buzzed with a text from Tommy. "Just signed up for classes. Thanks for believing in me." David smiled and put the phone away. He passed the spot where Eleanor's car had been stuck, now just an ordinary piece of highway. But it would never be ordinary to him. It was the place where everything changed, where a freezing stranger became a friend, where a warehouse worker became a business owner, where kindness proved to be the most valuable investment anyone could make. And somewhere across town, in a high-rise office, Eleanor was probably still working, still making deals, still running her empire,